Welcome to this episode of ATSFE Battlefield Walkaround. ATSFE BWs are created to discuss the quote-unquote historical situation, briefly mention the components, and more importantly, what's missing in the components. Let you know if these are supported by a VATS module, a Vassal ATS module, and then dive deep into the counters, scenarios, module notes, the other BW, and the map. In today's episode, I'll be taking a look at ATS Winter War, or ATS Sisu, as it's known on the website. The Winter War is what's printed on the Battlefield Walkaround that comes in the module. From the Freedom's Price series, I'll call it a series, there are a couple of Poland modules, a Hungarian module, and this module on the Sisu, or Winter War, which basically covers the early part of the war between the Finns and the Russians. And so without further ado, let's talk briefly about the historical situation it's meant to cover. From the introduction, it just says, a batch of new scenarios as the metaphor to experience the historical event of the Winter War. They're early war scenarios. They're ranging from early December of 39 to, I think it was mid-March of 1940. Is not intended for the big battles around the large fortifications. It's more the smaller battles up in the wastes and the icy wastes of Finland. So a little bit smaller engagements between some really good Finns and some really poor Russians. General components for this module: you're going to get 4 geomorphic winterized maps, which we're going to take a look at a little bit later, see what's interesting there. You get 1.5 counter sheets. One of those is the standard early war Russian infantry counter sheet. And then you get this one that has all the Finns and some vehicles and some other things. Again, we'll cover that a little bit later. And then you get 6 scenarios, 3 cardstock sheets. One scenario to a side. You get the Battlefield Walkaround, and fortunately, you actually get all the vehicle cards for which vehicles are shown on the counter sheet, which is a bonus. Now let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about what's not in the module. So, although the module clearly states that you get all the combat counters you needed to play, that is not entirely true. For scenario 2, you're going to be missing 1 Finnish 119 officer and an L39 MATR. Side note, you can find a YouTube channel, Forgotten Weapons, that shows that L39 firing. It's pretty cool. And you're also going to be missing 1 of the Russian BT-7A's vehicles. That's kind of big. In scenario 3, you are also missing that same 119 Finnish officer. In scenario 4, you're going to be short an M19, a Russian M1910 machine gun, medium machine gun. Fortunately, the Finns have a couple that they're not using, so you can swap one out there and just pretend that it's Russian. In scenario 5, you're missing 2 Finnish 5.38 infantry and 1 Finnish, and in scenario 6, you're going to be missing 1 Finnish M08 medium machine gun. It's unfortunate, not unusual, but just so you know going in that you might need to find some of those counters somewhere else. I did not check on my Mannerheim's Cross, although I did look for some other things in there, if some of those counters might be in there. The BT-7A you can probably find in some of the other Russian stuff. An L39 is a 20 Bravo medium ATR. I am not entirely positive that exists anywhere else. I'll have to look. Maybe I'll follow up in a comment or something. And then, 5.38s, I'm not sure where you're going to find Finnish 5.38s unless they come on this counter sheet. So that's pretty much it for what doesn't come in the module. Unfortunately, there is no VATS support yet. I'm sure at some point we'll get it in there. So that's about that. So let's take a little bit deeper dive. Let's talk about some of the counters, some of the kind of cool things that you're going to see in here. So first, hopefully you can see that. Here's the new Finns. You got 839s, 538s, 648s. I do want to point out that Mannerheim's Cross, they got nerfed. Oops. So in Mannerheim's Cross, we had 1039 Finns, 668 Finns, and 667 Finns. So, I don't know if they just got better later in the war, because Mannerheim's Cross really is more late war stuff, or however you want to look at that. But anyway, that's the way that goes. One of the more interesting things in here is you got these collapsed ice counters, which we're going to talk about more in terms of that big old pond up here, which we'll see soon. There are polka counters somewhere in here. Where do they go? Here, polka counters. I mean, basically transports, right? You have sleighs and Russian wagons. Now, interestingly enough, none of the scenarios call for the use of sleighs or wagons, but one scenario does use polkas, which, you know, again, if you go back to the Mannerheim's Cross, which this is very clearly derived from, some of those scenarios use those counters, but it is what it is. One of the other more interesting counters on here, no, not that one, this one, the K-57, so it's a bunker gun, which they decided to use GB as the abbreviation for instead of BG, and I'm not really sure why, but there you have it. A little bit more interesting than that is that it calls for bunker guns to always be placed in a pillbox, which I think are these counters. And I'll tell you why, is because in Mannerheim's Cross, you get these pillbox counters. Let me zoom in here so you can see that, which kind of match. But unfortunately, the Battlefield Walkaround doesn't actually talk about that. The scenarios just show you that you get 5 bunker counters or 2 bunker counters, and they don't say anything about it. So, you know, normal, everyday, missing stuff in the BW. Well, before I put that away, I thought this was pretty cool. The Russians, where did it go? They have this, I just saw this Su-12 here, which is a gun-armed truck that it has a turret and can face forward, but it can't fire forward by battlefield rule. But it can fire out of any of the other arcs. But it is a truck, so you know, be careful. Machine gun take that thing out in no time. And then you have the T-28E, which is a multi-turreted Russian vehicle. Early war Russian vehicle was kind of cool. In the Battlefield Walkaround, it'll tell you how that multi-turreted tank works and fires and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty neat. And there's the Su-12 rules as well. Let's kind of move on. That's really the kind of the cool counters that you might see in here that make it a little bit interesting. Scenarios, I think I mentioned you get 6 scenarios. They range anywhere from 1 panel to all 4 panels in play. As you may or may not remember, I said they are geomorphic, so the orientations will change. So for instance, here in scenario 6, you can see it's T6, T9, T8, T7, so it's all 4. T6 and T9 are oriented differently from this scenario. This one is number 2, but you can see T6 and T9 are oriented differently. Of course, that's the nature of the geomorphic maps, hence the quote-unquote historical situation. These are not necessarily the actual terrain, it is representative terrain. And then we talk about the bunkers with the KB guns. So for instance, in here you can see the gun, and 5 bunkers, but they're not those bunkers. And by Battlefield Walkaround rule, they can only be placed in a pillbox, which, okay. So I think they're missing a little there, so we might as well just move on to the Battlefield Walkaround. It does talk about bunker guns. They can only set up under pillbox counters. My assumption is that when they're provided in the setup instructions, they really mean these as opposed to actual bunkers. That's probably worth a question somewhere, or, you know, just figure it out and play and have fun. When you go to the Mannerheim's Cross scenarios, which, like I said, this is clearly derived from the actual pillboxes. These that I showed you earlier are listed in the actual scenario setup. So there you have it. Winter weather is in effect, not frostbite. Tony, you'll like that. Tony has a long and sordid history with failing his frostbite rolls. But snow ground cover, ice, obviously it's Finland and it's in the winter, there's going to be ice. So we have to deal with that. The ice holes are pretty cool. Two ways to form the ice hole is one, an HE attack that will form rubble. Will crack the ice and put a hole there. And also a vehicle that enters it has to make an immobilization, and if it fails, it will just go through. That's a non-small vehicle, by the way. Great vast majority of the Battlefield Walkaround rules are taken up with ski movement. I'm not going to go over them all, but there's all kinds of different ways you can ski through there. Obviously, it's mostly the fins, I believe. One of the cool kind of rules on there is this finish, hit, and run tactics. So you can see here in any scenario utilizing 839s, they get to make a grenade attack and infiltrate in a couple of different ways. So they can make a secondary infiltration after they make a grenade attack or after a successful melee, which is kind of cool. Gives them a little bit more versatility in terms of the Winter War. And then this is kind of cool too. Any finished squad with a morale level of 8 may use M weapons with no reduction. So they're full crews without having a leader there. One of the other cool things about this particular module, and one of the reasons I liked it, it's very early war, so the early war Russian tank limitations are in place. You know, they're harder for them to hit. You know, they have movement restrictions, all kinds of things, because they didn't have radios and those kinds of things. It's kind of cool. One of the reasons I liked it. Plus, it's the Winter War. It's a little bit more manageable than some of the other modules. Obviously, some of the scenarios are a little bit smaller. Not that I have an issue with space, but it just looked pretty neat. But so let's go on to take a look at the map. The map. I mean, the maps are geomorphic. They're pretty flat. There's one hill. You can see it right there. It's on T6. Otherwise, it's all flat. One of the more cool features is this big pond on T7. So depending on which side of that pond you start on and whether it's frozen or not, which I think in all the scenarios that I looked at, all the water obstacles were frozen. I think there was one that they were not frozen, but other than that, it's pretty much run-of-the-mill, you know, woods, brush. There's tiny little ponds here that may or may not be frozen. These are winterized hedges, but they still count. We got some winterized orchards here. I think that's the biggest village on one of the maps. That's T8. Most of them have very few buildings. Oddly enough, there's a very bright red bridge in the middle of T6. That's pretty much it. That's all I've got to talk to you about the ATS Sisu or ATS Winter War module. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to hear them. If you want any more details, just let me know. Again, this has been the ATSFE Battlefield Walkaround. Hope you enjoyed it.